Okay, we're on. All right, James back with you today. We're here with Rick Torres. Rick, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, James. Thank you.
So we're going to talk about strikes today, and this is a good time to talk about it. We have a lot of things picking up lately, especially with the SEIU, the Service Employees International Union, heading out some strikes in Houston that were just recently resolved, and a lot of animosity sprouting up in San Francisco and the Lower California area there. Rick, I wanted to ask you, what do you think these employees, what's causing them to strike?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of issues within a strike. It's once again during the contract negotiating process. What happens a lot of times is that companies are bent on just negotiating the contract and not at the same time communicating with their employees. In fact, I've been in contract negotiations many times when I used to work for the unions, where we tried to get an agreement not to release any of the bargaining issues out to the employees because we wanted to keep it secret. So we wanted to prevent the companies from communicating with the workers.
So basically the union's after unilateral control of the striking process.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, sure. Well, that seems counterintuitive to the employees because the strike's about what they want and what they need from their employer.
That's true. That's true. But once again, and James, we talked about what leads to strikes and what happens during strikes and what leads workers to walk out of a company that they worked for 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 or sometimes 40 years and walk on strike and abandon all the responsibilities. Once again, there's a lot of things that lead up before contract negotiations start. And if the union knows that they're going to have tough contract negotiations, it's not just about the economics of what they're asking. It's about the perception of the company. For a union, in fact, it'd be crazy for a union just to strike and the workers to walk out of the jobs not knowing, if they're going to be permanently replaced or not, for 50 cents an hour raise. Because if they're out on strike for 6 or 8 months or a year or longer, they're never going to make that money back up. So a union has to prepare their members also not just to talk about the economics of the contract negotiations, but once again, just like in organizing drives, it has to become a them against us atmosphere. Right. So they build up a lot of anger.
Because an employee's not going to walk out from a job, regardless of how unhappy they are with it, out of a job with job security and any kind of paycheck to only make a strike pay of $100, $150 a week. It just doesn't make sense monetarily. So you have to generate some sort of emotional back, as what I gather here, for what they want to do. There has to be a dichotomy established between the employees and the employer to create this kind of psychological motivation to give up their livelihood, essentially.
Well, yeah, absolutely. In fact, once again, even during organizing drives, during the life term of the contract, unions have to continue to struggle to make themselves relevant to the employees, to their members. So there has to be a reason that they're paying their dues on a monthly basis, whether they're getting it paid out of the check or that they're writing a check to the union, however it's set up. But the unions have to always have a reason for them to exist. So it's an adversarial relationship always between the union and the employer.
Sure. Okay, so recently these strikes, this upswing in strikes has been focused on the service sector. The SEIU has been a huge player in this. I feel like it's sparked off by the Houston, Texas strikes there against with the janitors and their employers. And then it spread to a little bit to San Francisco and the greater Los Angeles area, especially Las Vegas and that surrounding area. And even in New York, where, again, those office buildings are prevalent with lowly paid service workers, janitors, maintenance people, etc. Why do you think the service unions have been such a major player in this recently?
Well, and it's not so much the service union, the SEIU. What it is the industries that they're representing. If you look at a lot of the strikes that are happening, I mean, we're talking about Los Angeles. where they had massive strikes in the hotel industry, in the service industry, hotels, restaurants, nightclubs. They are very vulnerable to strikes. So it's a lot easier for the union to put pressure on management to give in to the demands because they're immediately affecting their ability to do business.
Right, because those employees there, those service employees, they're cleaning up the facilities, they're maintaining the facilities, and what generates profit and revenue for these companies, their employers that employ these people, are their clients, who come in and are immediately notice something. They would immediately notice if it weren't clean, if it weren't maintained, and that's going to draw business away from those people, the employers who are employing these janitors and maintenance people.
Yeah, even if they get into the hotels, just like the SEIU was going after some of the largest hotels in this country. Their goal was to prevent people from even going into the hotel, to be able to see the dirty rooms or the dirty floors, or not being able to order room service. Is in many of these major hotels, they had hundreds, if not thousands, of people in front of the hotels protesting. And another reason is that because they have so many workers at some of these huge hotels and convention centers, is that they may have a couple of thousand employees at a huge convention center in a major city, and first of all, it's hard to replace all of those workers. Second of all, they attack and they'll come in and they'll protest, protest in front of the hotels or the convention centers. And they prevent people from going in. Someone's on a vacation, or someone's going to hold a convention or a conference for the company. The last thing that they want is to be disturbed by hundreds of thousands of people protesting outside. They want to relax, or they want to have a conductive conference, and the union's goal is to disrupt that.
Sure, yeah. Strike's basic goal is to ruin a company, is to put them in such a tight spot financially or even in the public eye that they have to bring those workers back and they have to make those concessions.
Yes, when in any industry, the union's objective when they walk out on strike is immediately and to damage the company. They have to immediately damage the company to force the company to give in to the demands.
Sure. We were talking earlier about Occupy Wall Street and a lot of the public sentiment against big business lately. And we were talking about how when workers go on a strike, they can't strike. They're legally not permitted to strike companies that the company that they're directly striking does business with, to prevent those companies from doing business with the company that they're striking.
And you're talking about secondary strikes, James, and you're absolutely correct. But it's even more than that. I mean, you're looking at organizations, and the unions in organizations like Occupy Wall Street have been working together. And if you look at how labor law affects strikes or boycotts or secondary strikes, just from the labor law aspect of it, I mean, it's just like the job of the union is to immediately cause as much damage financially to whatever company they're going on strike with, and have massive protests or massive strike lines to prevent replacement workers from going in, or to prevent customers or clients from going into a situation like a hotel or restaurant. And what would usually happen if there's a disturbances or if they're in violation of the law, if they're causing hazards, where they're protesting, that the company will go and try to get an injunction against the union to limit the amount of strikers that they can have at any one given location or any one given gate. And this is something that we're still watching. It's something in progress. But my question is this, and how this will affect labor laws, is what happens if there's a major strike and the union, the company gets an injunction against the union to limit the amount of strikers that can be at any one location. Well, right away, that destroys the effectiveness of the strike. So what happens if an organization like Occupy Wall Street or some other organization comes in and says, okay, because we are not part of the union and we don't have, directly a dog in this fight. So, but we're so outraged at what this company is doing to their employees. We want to occupy that facility. We want to occupy and protest that company and try to educate people on why they shouldn't do business with that company.
Sure. So basically, those movements like Occupy Wall Street provide the unions with large groups of people that are available to them without the legal restrictions that union members have.
Yeah, and this is something that intrigues me. And if the Occupy Wall Street movement, continues to exist, continues to flourish, this is something I think that we're going to be seeing, and how it's going to affect, strike lines. I think it's something that's very, very, as possible as going to happen, and I think that the goal is already to make that happen, and we see across the country where the Occupy Wall Street movement is working closer and closer with labor.
Sure. And you know what, that creates an interesting problem for employers, because not only do they have to worry about the relations and the perceptions of their companies to just their employees, now they have to worry about their public relations and how they appear to the population as a whole. Because if they put off this negative image that they're not treating their employees right, or they're a company that violates ethical or moral codes that most of the populace has, then these Occupy Wall Street movements and similar movements to them are going to be more motivated to come out and support the unions as they strike.
Well, yeah. In fact, if you look at how unions out when Occupy Wall Street first came into existence, fairly quickly unions went in to help establish a system and help them to create a system or some kind of structure to the organization. I mean, in fact, one of the strengths of Occupy Wall Street is because they continue to say we're a leaderless organization. So, who is in violation if 1,000 people make a decision to go and protest a company because they're so outraged at the actions that the so-called actions that they're taking against their employees. But it even goes further than that. As you mentioned earlier, James, it's like secondary strikes or boycotts. It's illegal for a union to go after a client or or someone who's doing business with the company that you're striking. And this is another situation where an organization like Occupy Wall Street could, on its own, a so-called leaderless organization, could go in and, because they feel outraged or so-called outraged at the company that they're striking with, go out and attack other companies that do business with to try to force them to stop doing business with the company that is being struck. So there's a lot of situations that can happen that we're still looking to see how it's going to play out. But these are definitely things that I think that we're going to start seeing in the next year or so.
Sure, yeah. Okay, so I want to bring it back, like we always do, and hopefully always will, to what can employers do now to help with these situations? What can an employer say? What can an employer that already has unionized employees do to prevent a strike in their company?
And I talk to companies all around the country, and I speak at conferences and conventions all around the country. And one of the most common phrases that I hear is when someone has a union or unionized workers, the problem is that they pretty much give up on them. Well, we don't need to increase or to improve our HR department or our communication with our employees because we have a union. So a lot of times the companies just give up on their workers. While unions in the same aspect have to continue to demonstrate that there's a reason that union members are paying their dues on a monthly basis, or they may decide to decertify from the union. So they always try to keep, or in most cases, try to keep an adversarial relationship. When companies and when management teams give up on their employees and stop trying to make improvements on how they deal and how they communicate with their employees, it's always a mistake, because then you don't have that one-on-one relationship. If you look back and working with companies that have had workers who decertify from the union, one of the biggest causes that they were able to do that, or that made the union members make that decision that they wanted to try to decertify, was because there was really no need for the union. The communication was great with the members. They were treated with respect. They didn't need a union. They were wondering, why are we paying our dues? We have a good relationship. We have good communications with our management teams, all the way up, from the top down to the frontline supervisor. So they start to question, why am I paying this money out of my paycheck every month? So my advice to companies who have unions is the same advice I have to companies that don't have unions. If you don't want a union, communicate. Treat your people how you want to be treated, and transparency.
Right.
And the same thing with companies that have unions. Don't surrender your employees to the union. Continue to increase and improve your communicative skills with them, and make having a union obsolete.
Sure.
And then they'll ultimately make their decision on what they want to do, if they feel that this money is worth being spent or not. But irregardless, management in the company receives benefits from good communication.
Absolutely, and I feel like, if an employee can approach their employer with a problem, and it might not be solved to exactly the extent that the employee wants, but people are understanding, as long as you treat them with respect and transparency, and treat them as another human being. You come to your employer and say, hey, these health insurance premiums are rising, I need another $1.50 raise. The employer, instead of this wall of communication that a union creates, you can come and approach your employer, and the employer can tell you, hey, the company's struggling right now, we can't afford this, but we want to work with you towards a solution. And at that point, you're right, why are you paying dues to a union whose first response is going to be, well, strike, lose this money, go out, lose your job and your job security, maybe temporarily, maybe for an extremely long time. Nobody would do that. It just doesn't make sense. So at that point, you change the attitude from the employer thinking, well, I have a union, I don't need an HR department, the union handles that. You change that sentiment, you shift it to the employees, and the employees are thinking, well, I have a good HR department, I don't need a union. Why am I paying a union to do something that I can already do?
Well, yeah, James. In fact, it's the same reasoning that causes employees to seek a union or a third party to represent them. It's important not just to say yes or no, or if the answer is no, if you can't do anything better, explain to them. Transparency. Talk to them, communicate with them, explain what the problem is. It's not so much that workers who feel that they have no power, they have no voice within the workplace because no one listens to them or takes them seriously, is not because they expect to be told yes all the time, but what they expect and what they should receive is an explanation. Talk to them about the situation, economics or other situations that are happening within the company, and be honest with them. It's the same thing that prevents workers from trying to unionize. Is the same reason. Is the same, the same communicative skills that enhance workers when they have union contracts, and give them reason many times. And I talked to a lot of companies and workers who have decertified. Is because there's no more reason for them to have a union.
Absolutely. All right, thanks, Rick. I really appreciate it. And for our listeners out there, please stay tuned. Next week we'll have a special guest.
Okay, thank you.